Hey, hi. Thank you to you all who are already here. Good morning, good afternoon. So we are at a new time from now on. We're at 11:45 Tuesdays and Thursdays. That extra 5 minutes gives me, even today, it's such that extra 5 minutes between my last client and actually coming on live here gives me time to settle, be more prepared, be more present for you. So hopefully this will lead to a better class, a better experience going forward. So we are continuing with the question of who am I? Who are you? And today we're using Dogen. It's actually a quote I had started with a while back, and I realized I didn't do the prep work. So last week's live, if you go back, that is the prep work for today. So I am reading from Dogen's teaching called Actualizing the Fundamental Point, which is also known as the Genjo Koan. Genjo. Gen means to actualize something. Turn it. I think we use the word a lot now, manifesting, right? To make a man-child, a human child, you've manifested a child, you've made something, right? So the Genjo Koan, the Gen, it's Gen, right? Gen up there. God, I have 1,000 notes here, so I don't know if you can even see in there. Genjo Koan up here, right? The Gen is to make something actual, to make it real, to actualize something. Jo is to become, to complete, to accomplish. In a way, they're almost the same word, but they're just different enough. So Genjo means becoming, completing potential into actual, turning potential into actual. Right? And if you know anything about physics, right, everything is potential. Right? If you know, this is the observer effect with the electron versus the wave. I mean, with the electron is both a wave and a particle, right? And it's our observation of it that makes it one or the other, and can actually determine where the electron will show up, right? Just by the mere observation of it. So we know from the stance of physics that there's so much potential in everything, in every moment, in our matter. There's potential. How do you actualize it? And that's what this teaching is about. And that's why this questioning of self is so important. Actualizing the fundamental point is the Genjo Koan. It's actualizing our potential, right? So there's a piece of here in with this from a Zen perspective of both this equality of all things and the uniqueness of all things. Right? This is that oneness, that wholeness that is the earth. If you look at the earth from the International Space Station, it's one thing. Right? You look at this from afar, it's one glass, right? Inside of here is how many moving grains of sand at a speed that I cannot perceive, right? The one is many, the many is one, right? So there's this equality and uniqueness inherent at the same time, is also a part of this potential. This is all one, and yet there's a million unique little minuscule grains of sand composing that glass. Same with the water inside of it, right? How many molecules of hydrogen and oxygen are in there? One and not one. So these are just some concepts to kind of hold back over here as we go into the actual lines for today. So actualizing the fundamental point, the Genjo Koan, making the potential real. So in that's the context for the quote I'm about to give. The quote I am about to write from is in the description below, and it's also in the email I sent earlier today. So this is section 4 of actualizing the fundamental point. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To forget the self is to be actualized by myriad things. When actualized by myriad things, your body and mind, as well as the bodies and minds of others, drop away. No trace of realization remains, and this no trace continues endlessly. Today, we're just going to work on the first 2 lines of this. To study the Buddha way is to study the self. To study the self is to forget the self. So, remember, this is translated. I don't know if this is a translation from the Chinese or the Japanese. Dogen was Japanese, but he studied in China under the Chinese Zen masters, which is just the word for Zen in Chinese is Chan. So it's like, you know how red is, this is red, right? Red in English is red in Spanish is rojo. It's the same thing, right? But just different words for the exact same thing. Zen in Japanese, Zen is meditation or paying attention or awareness or living. There's a lot of ways to translate it. The word is Zen in Japanese. It's Chan in Chinese. So Dogen was the Japanese Zen master who went to China, studied in China, brought the Chinese wisdom to Japan. And in order to kind of validate his writings at some point, he wrote in Chinese. And my point here is that so much of this is language-based, and I'm not sure if this particular translation, because I didn't go into the introduction, is a translation of his Japanese or Chinese. I think it's a translation of his Japanese. So this first line, to study the Buddha way is to study the self. Another translation of to study is to be intimate with. Think about that. When I study something, say you're on a first date with someone and you're getting intimate with them, right? You're learning about them, you're studying them, you're getting curious about them, you're asking them questions, right? If I'm going to study this glass of water, I'm going to get curious and intimate with it, right? To study is to become intimate with. Okay? To study the Buddha way. In this, we've talked a lot about what is Buddha and that the word Buddha just means awake, right? To study the awake way is to study the self. To become intimate with living your life awake is to become intimate with the self. One of my favorite lines that we have also looked at it in the past is in Master Shitu's poem, The Song of the Grassroot Hermitage. The final lines are, if you want to be intimate, if you want to know the undying man in the hut, don't separate from this skin bag here and now. If you want to know, if you want to go beyond life and death, if you want to know the undying person that's here, don't separate from this skin bag here and now. If you want to know, Buddha means awake, enlightened. If you want to know enlightenment, study the self. If you want to be intimate with enlightenment, study the self. It all comes back to you. If you work with me as a private client, right, and say you have an issue with a coworker or a spouse or a parent or a sibling or a child, I will always say it's never about them. Because it's never about them. It's always about you. You must study yourself. Any problem you have with somebody else is just directing you back to yourself. This, to me, is why I think partnership, marriage is such a beautiful thing, because you're committing to another person to not run away when it's hard, because that person is ultimately, the problem's never the other person. It's about you. Now, if it's abusive or just wrong or whatever, that's a whole other story. But in general, with general arguments or stressors or pressures within a dynamic between two people, it's always pointing you back to yourself. to look at yourself, to be intimate with yourself. And through that intimacy with yourself, you then become more intimate with the other, with the world. Right? And that's actually what he says here. I mean, this can work with any relationship, but the one that you can't run away from is a really powerful one. Parents and children are similar, but there's a different dynamic in those relationships. There's a hierarchy in both, so that's a little different. So to study the Buddha way is to study the self. Another way to describe the Buddha way, like we just described it as the awake way, the enlightened way. If you're awake, you realize that everything's impermanent. And we did talk about this a couple of weeks ago in one of the lives. When you're awake, you realize everything is moving. Nothing is static. Nothing is the same as I thought it was. It's already moved on. So to study the Buddha way, another way to say that is to study impermanence. Another way to say this entire sentence is to become intimate with impermanence. To become intimate with the constantly changing moment by moment nature. If you were here last week, I had just gotten these beautiful tulips and they were alive and vibrant. And it's been a busy week. I haven't taken them down yet, and there's still the littlest bit of life left in them, but most of them, the petals are falling and they're dying. Some of them are still super beautiful and alive, and I fear that if I take out the dying ones, I'm going to upset the little bit of life left in the ones at the top. They're still super beautiful. So that's impermanence, right? Constantly moving and changing, beautiful at every stage. And if you know anything about flowers, these dried up petals, those are the seeds for the future, right? Where does life and death begin? We've talked about this in the past. But how do you become intimate with life and death? Look to the self. Become intimate with yourself. And you will realize that everything that you think you are. And then this brings us right back to last week. So last week, I, in the moment, wrote up a little worksheet for you. And I realized when I didn't watch the full replay, it was really hard to see. So I made this. So this is another version of what we did last week. So the first thing I had to do last week is, if we talked about who are you, right? And you need to have a really solid idea of who you think you are first. So the beginning of the exercise is write down who you are. And I put up here as an initial example, and I would say put down at least 15 to 30 adjectives that you would use to describe yourself, right? And one of the ones that I would say I put up here is kind, because as my experience as both a therapist and now a coach, and just a human, I would say that no matter how much someone appears to be an abusive narcissist, right? They have a kindness in them. There's times when they're kind and generous. And there's not one person I've ever met who doesn't have some innate sense that in some way they are kind. So I feel like this is a pretty universal thing to write here. And in my experience, no matter who I've worked with, there is kindness in everyone. It is what we focus on that increases where your attention goes. If you focus on your kindness, that will come out. And as we talked about, I don't know if a week ago or I think 2 weeks ago, kindness can also be a tool of manipulation. So there's a caution there. If it's coming from overflow of just a sense of, I just feel so good and I have such life flowing through me and I have more than I need. So here's my kindness and generosity. That's great. If there's a sense of lack and that if I'm kind, someone will like me or give me what I need, then kindness can become manipulative. Oh, here's the rub, though. We're all manipulative in different ways in order to get the things that we need, right? Massage is a form of manipulation, right? How do we get what we need out of life? So the pros and cons are everywhere. So first you write down who you think you are, right? And then for each thing that you write down, you want to write down the opposite, right? Because for everything that you think you are, there has been a time when you have been the opposite. right? I am a very kind person most of the time, and I have so many examples of the times that I've been cruel. I used to try to ignore them or justify them or explain them. Now I'm just trying to observe them and be aware of them and be kind to myself at those times, which is part of my work for me. Oh, hi. You want to say hello to everybody? Oh, maybe not. Okay. So first, who are you? Then write down the opposite, right? Here. Oh, you're so handsome. I love you. Oh. I don't know that you can walk on my lap right now. Then you write down the opposite. And the utility of these two things is to realize that you are both. You are the thing you think you are, and you are the opposite. This is the beginning of becoming intimate with the self. Because when you realize that you're both kind and cruel, you begin to touch on the impermanence of who you are. Remember, to study the Buddha way, to study awake, awareness, is to be aware that I am both kind and cruel. To study the enlightened way is to study the impermanence of reality, right? Sometimes I'm kind, but that's impermanent. Sometimes I'm cruel, that's also impermanent, right? The next piece of this, hi baby, there's a little boy right here. Oh, look at him. Such a handsome guy. Hey baby. Cat interlude. Always a good time for a cat interlude. To study the Buddha way is to study the self, to become intimate with enlightenment, to become intimate with impermanence, is to become intimate with the self. This is the This is the beginning of becoming intimate with yourself. Looking at that you are what you think you are, you're also everything that you think you're not. To become intimate with the fact that you contain everything. Because as we are the earth and return to the earth, as we are the universe and return to the universe, you are everything. That person you hate, you've got all that in you. That person you love and admire, you've got all that in you too. We are not separate. So to that point of not, once you begin to realize that you are everything, you also realize that you're not everything. So in the next column, and we did talk about all this last week in further detail, is you want to put down the not. I'm not kind, and I'm not cruel. And this goes back to, you say the word water, your thirst isn't quenched. Words are a weak proxy for reality. Kind and cruel are constructs. They're notions. They're word language-based descriptors that are not inherent in any reality. The word water is not water. The word cat is not. Whenever I point the way it is in my brain, it's always the opposite way. The word cat is not cat. You can see him in the shadows behind the curtain there. I say the word fire, my mouth doesn't burn because the word is not the thing, right? So then you get to the not. This is further becoming intimate with yourself, intimate with impermanence, intimate with not knowing. And it's all through looking at the self, right? These are the first steps. To study the Buddha way, to study the way of living an awake, enlightened, connected life, is to become intimate with the self. And these are the steps to actually doing that. The other way to do this is to just sit. A lot of people think that when they meditate that they don't do it right. If you notice my arm is moving, it's because I'm scratching cat butt. That actually is his back. When you study the self, you become intimate with the self and you realize that you are and you aren't everything that you think you are. You are so much more than what you think. And then what happens is when you realize it about yourself, you realize it about everyone. And this is then a basis for a deeper connection both first to yourself and then to the whole world, right? And then you begin to realize whatever I do to myself, I am doing to others. Self-hatred, self-love, I'm doing to myself, I'm doing to others, right? This is intimacy. And the point of you and the opposite and then the not of both, this is the beginning of not knowing. Because I can know that I'm smart and have examples of times I've acted very not smart, right? Smart, not smart. Not smart, no, smart, dumb, not smart, not dumb. Now I'm getting into the more that's beyond language, right? This is the beginning of living not knowing. And intimacy, as we've talked about in other classes too, one of my favorite teachings is not knowing is most intimate. Because it says, like, to be intimate, to study is to be intimate. To be intimate with something requires not knowing. If I think I know who you are, if I think I know who this little bug is, it's the moment I'm furthest away from him. Any idea you have of me is actually the barrier between us. Intimacy requires me not knowing, because my thoughts are the box and the limit to my vision. So the work here is to get beyond the limits of our thinking, right? And this is how we do it. This is how we practice it. We begin to, when you realize that you are all that you think you are and everything that you think you're not, you begin to realize that you're not what you think you are, right? Right? And you realize that you're more. This is not knowing in action. And then you can extrapolate that. The others, the animals, the world, the flowers, the water. And then it says, to study the self is to forget the self. And this is what's so interesting about intimacy. Because in that not knowing, in that deep connection, right? Thoughts drop off. I forget them. If I'm going to become intimate with this water and sip it, I'm not going to think water, water, water. I'm just going to feel it and taste it. And at what point does the water become me? At what point is there a separation between me and the water, right? I forget me and I forget the water. It becomes one thing. This is intimacy. When you forget all these empty ideas of who you think you are, or when you forget all the empty ideas of who you think someone else is, when you forget the self, you become intimate, you become connected. To study the self is to forget the self. The more you become intimate with yourself and really look into, who am I? When I sit and I'm quiet, oh, this is what I was about to say before I got off track. I think the cat got involved. And once there's a cat involved, everything just goes to the cat. One of the other best ways, this is a great exercise to do, but you also get this efficacy from just sitting. Because when you sit, and I'm going to sit here and get physically still and quiet and just focus on my breath, my mind's going to start to wander. It's going to go off in all different ways. People often think that that means that they can't meditate, but that's actually one of the main points of meditation. The point of meditation is to become aware, to study the self, to become intimate with it, to study the mind, to become intimate with the mind. When I am doing nothing, I'm just sitting here, and ideally my attention's on my breath, is when I can notice what my mind does when it has nothing else to do. Now I can become intimate with my own thoughts. We very rarely know or see what we think. When there's nothing else to think about, where does your mind go? What are the stories it creates? What are the narratives it uses to try to distract you from now? There's nothing wrong with this. Become aware of it. See it. Be aware of it. Right? And here's the cool thing. And this is like when you study something, you forget it. It drops off. Because the more I study the word fire, and I realize the word fire is not the reality of fire. Because when I say fire, fire doesn't come out of my mouth. I realize the word is empty. I realize the thought is empty when I become intimate with it. I realize my idea of Kirsten becomes empty. And when, as that line in ET Tues' poem about the grass hut said, if you want to know the undying person in the hut, don't separate from this skin bag here and now. As I become intimate with this skin bag and notice its continual changing. Now I'm thirsty. Now I'm hungry. Now I'm tired. Now I'm full. Now I'm hungry again. Which one am I? Now I'm awake. Now I'm energized. Now I'm cranky. Now I'm happy. Am I any one thing? No. It's a constantly moving, changing bag of cells. Can I even find Kirsten if I look and get closely enough? This is the wisdom of all these masters, is when they sat and looked closely enough at themselves for long enough, it becomes clear that you don't exist. And in that non-existence is a deeper connection to the whole that you are. And I can't explain this. It's like trying to explain an apple to someone who's never tasted anything sweet or fruity or juicy. Right? You could say an apple is tangy and juicy and sweet and it's got this like little zing to it. And then someone takes a bite of a tangerine and they're like, oh, this is definitely an apple. And you're like, that's absolutely not an apple. Because until you experience it, you can't know. You can describe it, but the knowing is here. This is why this sitting, the class that we have every Thursday, is so important. And you can sit with me or anywhere. You can sit by yourself. You can sit on a literal throne in a bathroom and just take a breath and breathe. You are practicing awareness. And as you practice that more and more, the whole of you, which you've always been, becomes clear. And that then leads us up to the next line, because when you become intimate with yourself, you do forget your idea of yourself and you move into the more that you are, because you are more, right? You're so much more than you think you are. You're so much more than anyone thinks you are. And to realize this, actualize the fundamental part, realize it, actualize the potential of you, the more that you are. And then that gets into these last two questions that we looked at last week. And the reading that I had in last week's teaching from the second book of the Tao that wasn't in the description is actually in the description of this class below, where I talk about where Stephen Mitchell talks about, she's the you've always wanted to be. Well, then that's these last two questions. Because who are you without a future? Write that down. Oh, no, it's over here. It's always where I don't think it's going to be. This is a great free association exercise. If I was to die in 5 minutes or 5 hours, who am I? Because so much of who we think we are is about some future ideal, right? But who are you if you have no future? It's a great exercise. And then counter that. This is almost like, who are you? The last question is, who is it that you've always wanted to be? It almost seems like that's a future question, but it's really a now question. Because at the same time that we're never who we think we are, we all have this inner body sense in our like deep integrity of like, I feel like I'm this person. I don't know, I'm graceful, I'm funny, I'm charming, I'm this, whatever your verbs are or adjectives. But I keep on acting in this way that's so opposite of it. Right? That's mind. That's the narrative, that's a story. The you that you've always wanted to be is who you are. Right? Where do our desires come from? It's a deep connection. Right? So when you are you without a future, and you can connect and be like, oh, I am the woman, the man, whatever, the person. I am the person I've always wanted to be. When all of my other ideas drop off and I stop trying to manipulate myself and the world to get to some future ideal and just am in my completeness right now, you're already her. You're already him. It's in you. But you have to be the one to recognize that and see that it's only your mind that gets in the way, right? And then you can forget it all, because once you have something, you can forget it because you know it's you. It's like, once I have the water, I forget the water, right? It takes intimacy. Then there's no barrier. And the barriers are all mental. They're not real. Right? This comes right back to the first chapter of the Tao Te Ching, where this is my old copy, and it's kind of falling apart, so I gotta be a little careful. The Tao that can be told is not the eternal Tao. Right? The Kirsten that can be talked about or named is not the eternal Kirsten, because Kirsten is moving and changing. Right? The second I talk about her, I put her in a box, in a hole, and now she's confined and limited. But she's already moving on, whether I know it or not. So what we talk about isn't it, right? And it talks about how the unnameable is eternally real. Naming is the origin of particular things. The unnameable is eternally... What are names but just labels that separate book from water? The unnameable is the eternally real whole, because ultimately, at least from the standpoint of physics, there is actually no separation between any of this. Look at the Earth from the International Space Station. There's no separation. It's one thing. Yes, at the level of the microscope, there's 1,000 separate things in here. From the level of my eyes right now, it's one glass of water. This is the bothness. This is where we get into some of the paradox. But once you open the door to you are the whole, right? That you're more than you think you are. And that more is unknown, unknowable, because it's moving and changing. The second I think I know it or can label it, I've stuck it in the past. It's already moved on from that, right? Once you can move in and get intimate with this impermanence is how you wake up to the whole that you are. And in that you do have a sense of forgetting the small self that you had constructed or that others had constructed for you to move into the more. So these are my teachings for today. I know that this is kind of deep and esoteric stuff. And here's the good news. You don't even have to worry about it. You already are it. You can't not be it. You know, it's like the sun on a stormy pitch black night. Cannot see any, like it's a new moon. There's no moon. It's the pitch black of night and it's stormy and cloudy and rainy. There seems to be no sign of the sun, but we all know the sun's there. We just can't see it. You are it. You are the you you've always wanted to be. There might just be some clouds of thought in the way, some storms of the mind blocking you. But you're already that. You're already the whole thing. And you can't mess it up. You also can't get it right. Can't get it right, can't get it wrong, because right and wrong are ideas. It comes back to, this mind. Sit, and this becomes clear. So I hope to see you all when we sit together on Thursday, 11:45, not 11:40, and sit strong. I'd love to take some Q&A, but it looks like my battery's going to die, so I don't think that's a good idea. If anyone has any questions right now, I have a good 3% of battery. So if anyone has any questions, I know this is pretty dense. You can also put them in the comments below. I actually just saw when I was logging on before that someone put a comment on last week's video. So I will get back to that. Well, after I recharge the computer because it's about to die. Thank you for leaving that comment. I'm sorry I didn't see it until just now. But I will answer these. And I think that question, actually, if I remember, it was like, so we're nobody, right? And I think they mentioned that they'd just begun to watch it, that they hadn't watched the whole thing through. Oh, that's a good, actually, I'll go with that question right now that she addressed. That I'm going to address her question, to the extent that I can remember it, where she goes, so does this mean that we're nobody, or from a Buddhist perspective that you're nobody? Nobody is an idea. As much as your someone is an idea, that your no one is an idea. These are all words of the language-based thoughts that we have. To say that you're nobody is the nihilistic side of the somebody that's hedonistic. Nihilism, nihilism, and hedonism are two sides of the same coin. They're the same thing. They're mind-based, right? They're trying to figure out and control things. Hedonism, everything matters. I must have everything. I want everything that I want. Nihilism, nothing matters. I'll never have what I want. Never gonna this, never. Same thing, different side of the same coin, stuck in the mind, stuck in a narrative. And you are stuck because when you're stuck in hedonism, if anyone's seen anyone like, my best example of, as far as I can tell, I've never met the man of a hedonist, is Harvey Weinstein, right? I have never met a hedonist who does not suffer greatly. There's never enough. They're never satisfied. There's never enough satisfaction, enjoyment, pleasure, power. There's never enough. And they always need more. It's voracious. It's never ending. There's never a satisfaction. There might be for a hot minute, but it's gone too quick. Nihilist. Also destructive. I mean, I think of a nihilist as like an Anthony Bourdain. Right? Had everything. Still felt so disconnected that life had so disconnected from his own life that, had a very, very tragic ending, right? Either way, you suffer when you're stuck in everything matters or nothing matters. Can you find the connected presence of now, which is beyond the ideas of self? Nothing matters to me, everything matters to me. Nihilism, hedonism, right? That's based in the self, but if you actually get intimate with yourself, sit here in the quiet, look at your thoughts, look at your heart, see what comes up. Just observe it with curiosity, no judgment. You will become so intimate with it. You will, if you trace back your thoughts and trace back your emotions, they will at some point be so clear. They'll make so much sense that you will have so much compassion for yourself that the pain or the suffering will just melt. And that's the forgetting of the self that Dogen speaks of. When you become so intimate with yourself, it does melt. Right? And then the next line, which is what, depending on how people digest this week, please do leave me your reviews, your thoughts, your questions, because I can go into this a lot more, or I can keep moving on. I don't want to go too fast, but I don't want to go too slow. So I'd like to go on to the next line, but I don't know if I've explained this well enough yet. Where to study the Buddha way is to study the self, or to become intimate with the Buddha way is to become intimate with the self. To study the self is to forget the self. To become intimate with the self is to forget the self. The next line, to forget the self is to be actualized by the myriad things. Realized, to be realized. What's really interesting about the way he writes this, he doesn't say that you realize everything that you want or are. No, that things realize you. Is to be actualized by. You are actualized by the myriad things. The water actualizes me. The book actualizes me. You actualize me. Because the self that's doing has dropped off. You've forgotten the self. So you are the whole thing, and you realize the whole thing in yourself. And this is where this stuff gets really, really cool. Again, what I love about these wisdom teachers is they were able to intuit all this just by looking within themselves, by getting quiet and intimate with themselves. So I'll leave you with the notion, with the concept, with the encouragement that everything you need is in yourself. It's never anywhere else. And I can say this with total certainty. Everything you need is within you. And the more you find it within yourself, the more you will more intimately and deeply connect with others without effort. It's the cool stuff. Much love. Thank you. Big love. Thank you guys for being here. A number of you got in on the beginning and stayed the whole time. I'm honored. Thank you. Please leave me your questions, comments in the comment section below. I will get to them. And I hope to see you all when we practice on Thursday. Much love. Big love.